only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 91 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. In this episode, I want to step into one of the deepest and most unsettling questions humanity probably has ever asked. That is, what if reality, as we see it, isn't actually what it appears to be? For many centuries, philosophers, mystics, and scientists have hinted at the same strange possibility. And most definitely in the last few years, physicists have come forward and suggested, with a greater understanding of the quantum world, that it might be possible that what we consider to be reality might in fact be some form of illusion, a hologram, some form of matrix, obviously made really famous in that amazing film, I suppose nearly 15 years ago now. In fact, it came out in 1999, so a good deal longer than that. And the symbols in that film of taking the red pill or taking the blue pill as being able to find out what is really real versus what is the matrix have almost become part of the English language as a way of describing about finding the truth versus finding the illusion. Modern physics suggests that reality as we experience it may be built from information rather than solid matter. And some theories even propose that the universe is behaving just like a hologram would behave. Others are suggesting that consciousness itself could be the fundamental building block of all that we see and feel and experience, and that the physical world might be more like some form of interface than a true structure of existence. Now, in this episode, I want to explore ideas from physics, philosophy, and consciousness research, of course, because it's all suggesting that there may be some hidden architecture beneath reality, a kind of cosmic code or framework that we normally cannot perceive. I've been looking at all sorts of theories about the universe, and these theories talk about the universe as a bunch of information, the possibility that reality functions like a simulation, and why some scientists believe our senses could well be filtering out most of what actually exists. I was quite interested the other day when I was reading Andy Weir's last book that's just been turned into a Ryan Gosling movie called Hail Mary. And he describes that the difference between antimatter and matter, which are known substances, are that both cannot coexist. If antimatter comes into contact with matter, it causes some form of huge explosion. But equally, it's postulated by physicists that although we're used to matter as being the substance that makes up everything that we consider to be reality, equally possible in another universe, antimatter could make up everything. And of course, if you lived in a world of antimatter, then it would be as real as to us living in a world of matter. I've also come across strange reports from people who, during altered states of consciousness, usually through taking psilocybin or DMT or LSD or other hallucinogenic compounds, who claim that they can see geometric patterns or symbols or some forms of structures or even glimpses of something deeper like a code, rapidly repeating that seems to overlay every object that they see in that state. Now, are these just tricks of the brain, or could they be tiny hints that the universe is far stranger than we ever imagined? So today I just want to dive into the possibility that behind everything we experience, there might be something else entirely. Now, you may ask, what has this got again to do with talking to the dead? Well, of course, if our reality is in fact a coded representation of consciousness that is projected to us, then that's yet another piece of evidence that shows that the life that we're living is within a physical body that disappears at some point of our life. But equally, there is something more to us than just the physical body, that there is a consciousness that is either projected into us or partly into us or is partly because we are receiving consciousness from outside, the idea of that remote consciousness. And if all of that is true, it would mean that at our physical death, our consciousness returns back to where it came from. And all of the things that I've discovered in the last 3 years nearly of doing this podcast would indicate that's completely the case. But providing some form of scientific basis to it, I think, might be that little catch that many people are looking for, because people who are very skeptical, even religious people, and particularly scientists, if it could be shown that there was an underlying reality to everything, and that it could be shown in some form of scientific way that consciousness is projected into us, and it's almost an illusion, our life as we see it, I think then people would start sitting up and paying attention and saying, yes, life is to be lived. Life is an experience that is a creation. It's what we've done before we take this life. And once we leave this life, we move back into that creative state and plan either our next one or further adventures. Now, the idea that reality might be informational didn't begin just with computers. In fact, philosophers have questioned the nature of reality for thousands of years. In ancient Greece, Plato suggested that what we are perceiving is merely a shadow of a deeper reality. And of course, in Eastern philosophy, especially in various interpretations of Buddhism and Hinduism, the world we perceive is quite often described as a kind of illusion masking a deeper truth. I think they call it Maya. But in the 20th century, something changed. Physics began revealing that reality behaves in ways that are deeply strange. Quantum mechanics showed us that particles behave like probabilities rather than solid, predictable objects. Observations seem to influence outcomes. Matter behaves like waves, and particles can exist in multiple states until it's measured. Now, at the same time, advances in computing introduced a new idea. It was called information processing, and some scientists began wondering, what if the universe is fundamentally information and not matter? And what if the laws of physics are simply rules governing that information? Now, one of the most famous theories along those lines appears in the book The Holographic Universe. This concept emerged from ideas proposed by the physicist David Bohm and neuroscientist Carl Prilbaum. The central idea is that the universe may operate like a hologram, and to understand that, we need to know what a hologram is. Unlike a photograph where each part contains only a fragment of the image, a hologram stores the entire image in every single part of its plate. So if you break a hologram in half, each half still contains the whole image, just with lower resolution. So Boehm suggested something quite radical. Maybe reality works like that. Instead of objects being separate things located in space, everything might emerge from a deeper underlying order, which he called the implicate order. And in this view, the universe we perceive, the one with space and objects and time, is the explicate order, a projection or an unfolding of that deeper structure. Now, Karl Pribram applied similar ideas to neuroscience, and he suggested that the brain might store memories in a holographic way, distributed across neural patterns rather than stored in a single location. This was partly inspired by experiments where large portions of an animal's brain were removed, and yet memories still seemed to be intact. Now, the implication of this was quite astonishing. So there is a suggestion that both the universe and the brain might operate according to holographic principles. Now, another direction these ideas took is known as digital physics. This idea proposes that reality might be fundamentally computational. In other words, the universe might operate like a giant information processing system. And some physicists have suggested that space and time might not be continuous, but instead be made of discrete units similar to pixels in a digital image. Now, one of the pioneers of this particular way of thinking was a man called John Wheeler, and he proposed the phrase, "it from bit." And the idea was really very simple, but quite powerful. Everything physical, every particle, every force might arise from binary information. Reality could be built from bits of information rather than material substance. Now, this idea has influenced several modern theories in physics, including certain approaches to quantum gravity. Perhaps the most famous modern version of this concept is something called simulation theory, and this idea gained widespread attention after the philosopher Nick Bostrom proposed a thought experiment in 2003. Bostrom argued that if a civilization becomes technologically advanced enough, it could create extremely detailed simulations of its ancestors. If that happens, there could be millions or billions of simulated realities for every one real universe. Statistically speaking, that would mean it's far more likely that we are inside a simulation than in the original base reality. Now, if you're still keeping up with me, there is another book that I've had a look at called The Simulation Hypothesis, and this explores it in quite a lot of depth. And the idea isn't necessarily that someone is controlling the simulation in a malicious way. Instead, the universe could be part of an experiment, a historical recreation, or simply a highly advanced form of entertainment. If that were true, many features of physics might be explained in computational terms. For instance, the speed of light could be a maximum processing speed, and quantum randomness could be computational shortcuts, and space could be a rendered grid. But of course, there is currently no direct evidence that we're living in a simulation. But the idea has sparked fascinating debates in philosophy and physics. There's another theory that pushes that idea even further, and instead of reality generating consciousness, maybe consciousness generates reality. Now, this idea appears strongly in the trilogy of books which is called My Big Toe, or for short, The Theory of Everything. The author proposes that the fundamental layer of reality is not matter or energy, but consciousness itself. And in this model, reality works like a massive information system where individual consciousness participate in a virtual environment. Our physical universe would then be a virtual reality created by a larger consciousness system. The purpose of this environment, according to the theory, is to allow consciousness to evolve by making choices and interacting with others. Now, while controversial, this theory connects to the growing scientific mystery. We still don't understand what consciousness actually is. Some scientists believe consciousness may emerge from complex brain activity, and others suspect it could be a fundamental property of the universe, similar to space, time, or energy. Now, I'll put my cards on the table. I love this particular idea because one of the most important influences in my life as a young man was the writings of the author and medium Jane Roberts. And if you can remember anything from what she wrote, the line, "thoughts create reality," are probably the most important things. The idea that everything that we do, everything that happens, is created by us as our thoughts. And yes, this may be true, or it could be that not only do our thoughts create reality, but maybe our thoughts before we became real create our reality. It's a fascinating subject. Another fascinating idea comes from cognitive science, and in the book The Case Against Reality, a researcher proposes something called the interface theory of perception. The argument is this: evolution does not favor organisms that perceive reality accurately. Instead, evolution favors organisms that perceive what helps them survive. In other words, our senses might not show us reality as it truly is. They may show us a simplified interface, like icons on a computer desktop. Think about a computer file icon. When you see the icon, you're not seeing the billions of electrical states inside the computer. You're seeing a simplified representation that allows you to interact with the system. So the theory suggests that our perception of physical objects may work the same way. Objects might not actually exist as we perceive them. They might be just symbols representing deeper informational processes. Now, even in mainstream physics, the universe appears to have hidden layers. For example, there is a theory called string theory, and this proposes that fundamental particles are actually tiny vibrating strings, and these strings might exist in extra dimensions of space that we cannot directly perceive. Now, some versions of this theory require up to 10 or 11 dimensions. Another idea explored in modern physics is the multiverse. And this theory suggests that our universe might be just one of many universes with different physical laws. These universes could exist in higher dimensional space or branch off from quantum events. Now, in a sense, the reality we experience might be just one layer of a much larger structure. But let's go back to ancient philosophy, because what's interesting is that many of these modern ideas echo ancient philosophical traditions. In Taoist philosophy, the universe is described as emerging from an underlying unity called the Tao. And in certain interpretations of Buddhism, reality is described as independent and empty of any substance. In Hindu philosophy, the universe is sometimes described as a cosmic play of consciousness. And there are books like The Tao of Physics out there, which explore the parallels between modern physics and ancient metaphysical ideas. While the languages are different, the core intuition is similar. The world we experience may not be the ultimate layer of reality. Now, I have to say, you have to approach many of these ideas with tremendous caution, because many of these theories are just philosophical interpretations. None of this is particularly proven by facts, and science, as we all know, works through testable predictions and empirical evidence. But at the moment, there really is no scientific evidence that can prove conclusively that reality is a simulation, or that the universe is holographic in a philosophical sense, or that consciousness creates reality. However, there are a tremendous amount of anecdotes about it. If reality is fundamentally information, then matter may not be the ultimate foundation of existence. Instead, the universe might be closer to a cosmic process than a static machine. Now, some researchers even believe that future discoveries in physics could reveal that information. Computational or consciousness ideas are deeply connected. Whether or not these ideas turn out to be true, they highlight something quite remarkable. The deeper we study the universe, the stranger it becomes. I'm always reminded of something that Stephen Hawking said once. He said that what really makes him think is the question, is there a God? And he said, although he was fundamentally an atheist, he believed that the deeper you looked into physics and the ideas that underlie our understanding of the physical world, it gets to a point where you cannot explain it anymore. But it is so beautiful and the structure is just so magnificent. And he said, if you push beyond that to areas of physics that we can't quite glimpse, he believes that might be what we would call God. Now, there's another fascinating and controversial idea that we've talked about before, and about the hidden structures behind reality. And it comes from reports from people who've taken very powerful psychedelic substances like DMT or psilocybin. Now, across many accounts, people describe something strange, and they tend to describe the same strangeness, which is when you have a psychedelic experience and it becomes really intense, you begin seeing intricate patterns and symbols, and sometimes what appear to be almost hieroglyph-like shapes or flowing geometric codes constantly moving. Now, some people have interpreted these visuals as if they are glimpsing the source code of reality. Now, before we go any further, it's important to say that experiences when you've had drugs like DMT or psilocybin can be highly subjective, and science at the moment does not interpret them as evidence of literal hidden codes. But the consistency of certain descriptions has made the topic interesting to researchers studying consciousness. Under psychedelics, many people report seeing repeated geometrical grids, fractal patterns that endlessly replicate themselves, luminous symbols or glyphs, and structures that appear almost mathematical in nature. Some users describe the sensation that they are seeing the underlying framework that reality is built from, as if the ordinary world has been peeled away to reveal its deeper architecture. Now, in psychedelic research terms, these types of visuals are often called entoptic patterns. Now, scientists believe they may arise from the way our visual cortex processes signals when brain networks become highly interconnected. So in that way, the explanation is it's neurological. And when substances like psilocybin affect the serotonin receptors in the brain, particularly the 5-HT2A receptor, they temporarily change how different regions of the brain communicate with each other. This can create extremely vivid sensory patterns as the brain's normal filtering mechanisms are relaxed. In other words, the brain might start generating complex internal imagery that feels more real than ordinary perception. But some theorists interpret these experiences completely differently. They argue that psychedelics might allow the brain to access layers of perception that are normally hidden from everyday consciousness. In that interpretation, the geometric patterns and symbolic forms could represent the brain interacting with deeper informational structures of reality. This idea has been discussed in psychedelic research circles and in loads of speculative books about consciousness and information theory. Now, another intriguing aspect is that many of the psychedelic vision things resemble mathematical fractal structures that repeat themselves at different scales. Fractals appear throughout nature, from snowflakes to coastlines to the branching of trees. And because fractals also appear in computer-generated worlds and mathematical systems, some people see them as evidence that the universe itself may operate through these strange informational patterns. Now, anthropologists have also noticed something interesting. Similar geometric forms appear in ancient cave art. These are like tribal patterns and religious symbols, and they appear across many different cultures. Some researchers believe that humanity may have been experiencing altered states of consciousness for thousands of years, and that these visions influenced early spiritual imagery and art. However, from a scientific perspective, the most widely accepted explanation is, of course, still neurological. The brain is an extremely complex pattern-generating system, and when its normal sensory filters are altered, it can provide vivid internal imagery that feels deeply meaningful, even if the source is entirely within the brain. But regardless of that explanation, these experiences raise an intriguing philosophical question. If our normal perception is only a filtered version of reality, as some scientists suggest, then changing the brain's filtering mechanisms could dramatically alter what we perceive. Whether these visions are glimpses of deeper structures or simply the brain exploring its own capabilities, but it all remains open to question. And either way, the fact that the human mind can generate such complex symbolic landscapes reminds me of something quite extraordinary. Consciousness itself may be one of the most mysterious frontiers in the universe, and understanding it might ultimately tell us just as much about the nature of reality as physics does. So, is reality a code? We don't know, but science is gradually revealing that the universe is far more mysterious than we once believed. Matter dissolves into quantum fields. Space and time may emerge from deeper structures. Consciousness remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries. And information appears again and again as a fundamental ingredient of the consciousness. Perhaps reality is not a static thing at all. Perhaps it's a process, a computation, a pattern unfolding. Or perhaps our minds simply love finding patterns in the unknown. Either way, the search for answers continues. And the next breakthrough might completely change how we understand reality itself. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
you.